Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for our last webinar of the season, Apps for Outdoor Exploration. I'm excited about tonight's webinar because I love using a number of these apps. I use them a lot, and I'm happy to share them with you, and I hope you will find them useful when working with youth. Most of you are probably pretty familiar with streaming platforms these days, but just in case, I want to introduce you to a couple features of Zoom. I always recommend that you exit full screen when you join Zoom so that you can dock the chat window to the side. And to open the chat window, you're going to look for the little speech bubble icon. And then over here, right above where you would enter your text, there should be a drop down. And you want to make sure that that is selected to say to everyone. That way we can see what each other are saying and have conversations in the chat window as we progress through the webinar. So as we get started, I would love to know in the chat window where you're from and what your role as an educator is. We've got New City Library, awesome. Special needs high school teacher from Texas. We have an outdoor recreation planner. High school environmental science and biology teacher. North Carolina, Central Florida. Awesome. Got some homeschool families as well. Nature lab teacher at a farm. Awesome. What an amazing mix of folks. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. I think that the apps that we'll be talking about today can be really translatable and usable in all of your contexts. So I think everybody will find something to take with them when they leave the webinar tonight. So I'm coming to you from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, where our mission is to interpret and conserve the Earth's biological diversity through research, education, and citizen science focused on birds. It is a smoky day here at the lab with hazy skies and orange sun as we get some of the smoke from the fires in Canada. And my name is Kelly Schaefer. I'm our outreach coordinator, and I am joined by Steph Somerville Zamora in the chat window, who was our project assistant, and she will be sharing links with you throughout the webinar and answering questions for you as well. So feel free to communicate with us there. And on the K-12 education team, our mission is to create innovative resources, deliver transformative trainings that empower educators to build young people's science skills through nature, citizen science, and inquiry. And in this webinar, we're going to take a little time to talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of using technology in outdoor learning. We're going to talk a little bit about citizen science, and then we'll go over some free apps that support outdoor exploration. So let's jump right in. When you think about using technology in the outdoors, what are some disadvantages that you think of that come to mind when you think about using apps, or what are some advantages? Yeah, so I'm seeing a few disadvantages pop in, like battery life. It can be a distraction. Having access to the internet or data plans. How are you going to be able to download the apps? Is everybody going to have access to the app or a device that can use the app? Let's see. Some advantages I'm seeing pop up is learning new things, making connections to citizen science, crowdsourcing data. Some can be really easy to use. They're lighter than a field guide. They're pretty convenient. I'm also seeing concerns about and disadvantages, screen time issues, distraction issues. Yeah. But Stephanie's bringing up that they can be a great way to reach the younger crowds. So it can bring people into the fold, maybe folks who aren't super into nature are into technology, and seeing how the two interact can bring them into a program. Yeah, so there's so many more great responses in the chat window that I won't be able to go through them all, but I think you guys are nailing some of my own fears and concerns, and then also some of the things that I get really excited about when it comes to using technology and apps in the outdoors. And I did notice a question in the chat window about whether this webinar is being recorded. Yes, it is. We'll make the recording available to everyone in our YouTube channel. So we'll send a link to everybody who registered. Well, thanks for sharing your ideas. And I want to jump in a little bit to some of the benefits of technology in outdoor learning spaces. So it really does provide an opportunity to enhance learning by providing context to what you're observing. So you get this immediate kind of perspective on the data that you're collecting and how it fits into the world at large, helps create connections between communities and science, and helps people feel like they're really contributing. And it provides us with this great opportunity to personalize learning to what we're interested in. Another opportunity is one that got brought up in the chat window. It extends our reach. It helps us reach broader audiences, bridge the gap between folks who are interested in technology and those who are interested in the outdoors. And can help us meet our inherent goals. So for example, 4-H STEM goals and NGSS standards, technology are a part of those. And so just a little anecdote, I was doing interviews with folks about using mobile technologies in their environmental education settings. And this great anecdote came up from a woman who was using them in a after-school program, and noticed that there was one student who just wasn't really super involved. They were maybe a little shy about getting their hands dirty. It was a water quality program. And weren't really jumping into things. And so the instructor gave them the device that they were using to record their data in. And all of a sudden, the student became the center of activity where everybody was coming to them to get their observations added into the app. And so they really became part of the program. So there are ways that we can use technology to bring people together and help them feel welcome and part of a program. But, you know, it is something we have to consider, like, why are we using technology in an environmental education field? And I asked this of several environmental education practitioners, and over again, the idea that I heard was like, it's our future. Like, we can't ignore it. It's just part of our future. So let's find ways to use it really intentionally. So one of the things that some research about how to use environmental education and technology and how to combine those things, that tells us a little bit about when it goes wrong. And it's usually when it's just replicating something we can do elsewhere. So you'll find some apps that are field guides alone, and they can be really nice for convenience sake, but that's not necessarily a value add unless that convenience sake, it makes a huge difference for your program. But there are other apps out there like Merlin, which we'll get into, which add this dimension of, yes, I'm like a field guide, but also I help you identify things through computer technology. So there's a value add. So if we can use technology in a way that adds value to our experience, like allowing us to collect data or helping us identify things in a really interactive way, we can add that value. And so when technology goes right, this is another question I asked of practitioners. And the idea again came up that technology has to be used as a tool and not as a replacement. It has to be very deliberately used in a program so that kids and adults know how it can augment their learning and their experience and help document it versus distracting from it. So some of the tension that you all talked about in the chat window as well. And this is where citizen science comes in for me. Citizen science is a really powerful way to incorporate technology into your practice and into your programs or your activities with your homeschool family as well. So citizen science is a group of projects or a term for projects. You might also have heard community science or participatory science, where people like you and me who aren't professional scientists report our observations using basic scientific protocols to databases that can then be used to answer real-world questions. And I love this image about citizen science because it really captures the scope of what citizen science covers. It can be projects from looking at things at the scale of the universe to the microscopic, from the global to the local, from entirely outside to entirely inside, anywhere in between. So whatever your interests are, whatever the youth you're working for interests are, you can find a citizen science project for you. And for us as educators, it's great because it helps us meet science and learning standards. It's this exciting real world opportunity to get to know the natural world around you, often very low cost. And in the case of citizen science projects here at the lab, it actually helps birds, it helps scientists. And it's this opportunity to create a sense of curiosity, a sense of wonder while connecting kids to their local environment. If you've been to a webinar with me before that talks about citizen science, you've probably seen this image because I just love it so much. So I want to pause for a second and ask you in the chat window, what do you think this image is? What does it represent? Light pollution, light seen from space. Yes, it's really does look like that. That's what it makes me think of every time I look at it too. But there was a correct answer came up through the chat window. Birds across the world, birding hotspots, data points, eBird. You guys are getting it, absolutely. So this is actually a map of submissions to the eBird database. So every point of light you see on this map is a submission to the eBird database. There's not really an underlying continental map here. The fact that you can see the shape of our world this well means there's that many people out there who care about birds and are sharing their observations. And the longer you look at this, the more you will see incredible details, like maybe roads or maybe rivers popping up, shipping lanes out to Hawaii or in Antarctica. So there's lots of incredible data here. And what that looks like by the numbers is way more than 1 billion observations in the eBird database by now, more than 80 million checklists entered by 889,000 participants, covering 10,714 species of birds, which is more than 98% of all the species of birds in the entire world. So what this means is there are just an incredible number of observations coming into this database, an incredible wealth of data. If you think about what it would take a scientist or a group of scientists to replicate this data set in their lifetimes, it's just not possible. A data set like this is only possible through citizen science because citizen science is people-powered science. And if you'd like to learn more about citizen science or dive into some more resources, I highly recommend these two websites. citizenscience.org and scistarted.org. Citizenscience.org is the Citizen Science Association, so it can tell you a lot about what citizen science is and what's new in the world of citizen science. And then scistarter.org is where you can go to look up citizen science projects. So this is a database where you can search for projects by the topic, by whether it's indoor or outdoor, by the age group of students you're working with. It's a great resource for you. So today we're going to talk about a few different programs. We're going to talk about Globe Observer. Globe Observer is a project that has a couple different aspects, but it incorporates your observations with satellite data and NASA satellite data, I should say. And then we'll talk about eBird, which is a bird-focused citizen science project. The two apps we'll talk about there are eBird app and Merlin app. So the eBird app is for logging your observations, and the Merlin app is for helping you identify birds. We'll also be talking about iNaturalist, which has a similar setup with two different apps. There's iNaturalist, which helps you log sightings, and there's Seek, which helps you with identification. iNaturalist does some identification help too, which I'll talk more about, but Seek is kind of a live identification feature, which we'll demonstrate in a little bit. And before we get too far along, all of the apps that I mentioned today are featured in our blog, Apps for Outdoor Exploration. And we have 4 apps that we talk about there, or 4 groups of apps, I should say. One's focusing on birds, some on plants and animals, and then weather and soil. And Steph will share a link to that in the chat window. All right, let's talk about Globe Observer. This is a really cool app that's part of the Globe program, and it's all about making environmental observations that complement NASA's satellite observations, and it helps study Earth as like a global environment. So it's really big picture work, and it has participants in more than 120 plus, that should say countries, more than 120 plus countries. And there are 4 different projects on the app that you can see here. There's clouds, mosquito, habitat mapper, land cover, and trees. Today, I'm just going to touch on the cloud project. So I'm going to play this short little video here that will walk you through what making an observation to this cloud Globe Observer project is like. So as you can see from the video, the app does a really fantastic job of walking you through your different options of making a cloud observation with these awesome pictures and demonstrating like what does 25 to 50% cloud cover look like. And so it is actually pretty easy to do thanks to all of those great images and descriptions in the app as you're entering the data. And this is really useful information to have because clouds really affect the temperature of the planet. Having a better understanding of how clouds change over time is really useful, but also matching that to satellite data coverage is really useful because that helps us understand what satellites are seeing versus what conditions actually are on the ground, so we can make better sense of the relationship there and the accuracy of what we're interpreting from satellite imagery. So when you make these observations, you can do them anytime. It doesn't have to be in relation to a satellite, but if you want to do them in relation to satellites, the app will actually tell you when satellites are passing over. You can turn on notifications, or you can click on make an observation for clouds, and it'll give you a list of times that the satellites are passing over for that day. So I did, for example, 2 observations today within 15 minutes of when a satellite passed over. So those observations would count for that comparison data. And these are screenshots from when I did my observations. And you can see here that there's these great pictures. I had to select obscured for mine. I couldn't actually see if there were clouds or not because of the smoke. And then you can pick the different types of obscurations. Mine was smoke. And then these are for choosing the ground conditions around you. So it's a really easy process. I know kids are so technologically savvy that they will breeze through submitting to the app like this. What's great for this as educators is the Globe Observer app is part of a larger Globe program. And you can go to this website, and there should be here, this website here. And there's amazing information here. If you click on the Globe data section, you'll see something like this, where you can see who's been submitting what data in the last 7 days. There's data visualization that you can play around with. What's also amazing is that there's trainings for how to use Globe. There's teacher guides, and there's activities that you can explore in this area too. So there's lots of amazing resources for you. For example, this is the website on the teacher's guide. So it talks about the protocols for the different projects that you can participate in. So for example, the atmosphere one would probably be tied to the clouds observations that we just went through. There's also, not just for classroom teachers, there are informal educator activities as well. So that's a great resource too. So definitely worth checking out. All right, now let's jump into some of the lab's work and talk a little bit about Project eBird. So eBird, its motto is every bird counts. So essentially any bird you see at any time, anywhere, you can submit to the eBird database. We want your rare bird sightings. We want your super common bird sightings. Because one of the ideas here at the lab is that we want to keep common birds common because it's a lot easier to keep bird populations healthy than it is to bring a bird back from the brink. And eBird helps us understand population trends across all habitats and all species. So it's really important and useful information. And I'm going to go ahead and let the eBird team explain it because they do it so much better than I can through this little video here.
Every day, millions of people around the world enjoy watching birds and recording their sightings.
What if there were a way to take all of these observations, yours, ours, everyone's, and put them all in one place?
If we could do this, we would fundamentally transform not just birding, but science and conservation.
From this idea emerged eBird. Put simply, eBird is a way for anyone around the world to store their birding observations, their photos, their sound recordings, and make them available to educators, scientists, and birders. It's incredibly easy to use, and it's incredibly powerful. All you do is let us know where you went birding, when, how far you traveled, and what you saw. It's powerful because hundreds of thousands of people all around the world are doing it, and it's growing. eBird already safeguards 500 million sightings, information that allows all of us to understand the movements and needs of birds at global scales. eBird maintains your lists for you and shares them with other birders from around the world. By sharing, it's now possible for anyone, anywhere, to find your target birds and the best birding hotspots any time of the year. Before eBird, there was no way to comprehensively understand population-level movements of many species. By combining your sightings with remote-sensed habitat data from NASA, we're able to generate species distribution models that provide an unparalleled view of where and when birds are in the landscape. Scientists and students all over the world are now able to use eBird datasets for their research at a variety of spatial scales. These observations help inform better conservation strategies, opening the door to the future of bird conservation. And this is just the beginning. With the help of millions of people who come to eBird each year, we are creating a free, open access system that is easy to use, fun, and rewarding. Rewarding for birders, for scientists, for conservationists, and ultimately the birds themselves. Go to eBird.org or download eBird Mobile to get started, all for free. By joining eBird, you're joining a global team of people that share your passion for birds. Be a part of it.
So that video was made in 2017, and I don't know if you saw it flash across the screen, but when it was made, there were 24 million checklists, and now it is 2023, whoof, and there are 80.9 million checklists. So eBird really is growing at an exponential rate. So this is a data product that came out of eBird, and I want you to take a look at this and watch it for a cycle or two and share in the chat window something you notice or what you think might be represented in this map. Yes, so I see migration coming up. Absolutely. So let me ask another question. Do you think we're looking at one species or multiple species? Oh, you're noticing the sighting above Maine here tends to follow a different path than the other ones. Yeah, so this is multiple different species. And if you look, you can almost see what seem to be like common migration pathway kind of over here over the Gulf, which is one of the important flyways in our country, or excuse me, in North America. So the dots you're looking at, they change color with the time of year. So the color change represents the time of year. You can see that scale here. Each dot though represents the geographic center of a species range on that day, which is pretty amazing. So there's 118 different species on this map. And when you're looking at that dot, that's the geographic center of that species range. And that level of data is possible through eBird with these huge databases. I see a question about whether this would be day or night migrants. This would be probably both. I'm sure it's a mix of birds. We're just looking at location data, so this is independent of the time that they migrate. Cool. I love products like these because I think it brings home the power of citizen science data to really help us see some big picture things about our world. You can see some areas where a lot of species spend a little bit of time and how those could be important places. Right. So as we saw in the video, there are a couple of different ways to enter eBird data. You can use the app or you can use online features. It was going to ask you for some data about where you went birding, how long you were out birding, how many people were with you, and how long you were out there. And that will help us determine what we call effort. And that's something that allows us to standardize sightings to make these really cool data products like the last one we looked at. And another thing it's going to ask you is, are you submitting a complete checklist of the birds you were able to identify? This is an important question because that means we can use it as presence and absence data, which both are really important to eBird. And so what this means is, were you submitting everything you were able to identify? Maybe you saw something flip by and you weren't able to identify it. That's okay. Like, you're submitting everything you were able to identify. But say, for instance, you only saw one cool bird and you just wanted to submit a cool list, and know there's other things around you, but you're just submitting for that one bird. That would be an incomplete list. And you would say no to that question. Actually, you'd call that an incidental, which is a different type of list, but eBird walks you through all those different things. And so that's an important question to know about when you're submitting to eBird. And then when you submit it, it goes into the database and becomes part of this amazing research database. You can always access your own data too, and you can access all the database data and download it yourself if you wanted to. If you are interested in learning more about eBird, how it works, why it works, what sort of research comes out of it, how reviewers play an important role in eBird data quality, I recommend the eBird Essentials course. This is a free course on our Bird Academy platform. Steph, I didn't remember to include this in the list of links that we'll need, but if you could grab it, that would be great. I highly recommend taking this. It takes about 3 hours to complete, but it will help you feel ready to submit to eBird with confidence and help you understand how it all works and what you're becoming a part of. So one thing to note about eBird is that it is not COPA compliant, so you can't have an account on there if you're under 13 years old. And the way that we suggest teachers work with this, if you work with younger students, is by creating a group account. You'll want to use a unique email and password that you don't mind sharing with the students. This is important because the lab is a single sign-on. So if you want to have a personal account, or you have a personal account in Bird Academy or Feeder Watch or any of the other lab sites, you don't want to use that login information for eBird, because then the students will have access to all that other stuff. So it's just better to create a classroom email and a password that you can share with students. And you might want to consider having different group accounts if you're dealing with different classes, so you can have that data separate and do comparisons between it even. But one thing to note is eBird actually prefers if you submit from a personal account and share to a group account. Unfortunately, if you want the students to submit, that doesn't work. So you want to make sure that you share your checklist with a personal account if you have one, or that you're checking the email of the group account frequently. Because if eBird has any questions about a checklist, they want to be able to contact you and ask for confirmation. And so what I mean by that is eBird has reviewers, and it's got these filters set up in the background. So if you were to see an unusual bird for your area and didn't provide a good description of it, they would ask you just for more information so they could confirm the sighting. It's not a bad thing. I still get emails and questions asked of me sometimes for my sightings. And it's actually kind of fun because it's like, oh, did I see something exciting? So for example, if I was in Ithaca, New York, and I reported a flamingo, like they would need more information from me to accept that a flamingo was seen for the database. And maybe I have pictures or maybe a really good description that I can share with them, that they'd be like, okay, cool, that's what you saw. All right, so let's talk about the tools that help us submit to eBird. This is another app. I'm not sure, and whenever I talk about the Lab of O, I should say, this is what people usually talk to me about, is this app. And so you may have already heard of it. Hopefully you've had a chance to explore it. It is a fantastic app. It makes bird identification easy. And I'm going to try something here. I'm going to try and share my phone screen with you so we can demonstrate Merlin. So hopefully right now you are seeing my desktop, and in a second you should be seeing the Merlin app. Is everybody seeing that? Awesome, sweet. Okay, so there are 4 components to Merlin Bird ID. We're going to look at the Start Bird ID function first. So we are going to work on identifying this lovely bird that we're looking at in my background picture. So I'm going to hit Start Bird ID, and it's the first question is, where did you see the bird? I'm going to go ahead and say current location, and it will know where I am because my phone knows where I am if you allow location permissions. And then it wants to know when you saw the bird. I'm going to go ahead and say today. What was the size of the bird? It's a little hard to tell in this photo because, you know, it's not to scale. But I'm going to say this was around robin size, judging by how it looks on that thorny branch. And then we're going to pick out up to 3 main colors that we saw. So I'll pick gray. There's kind of this reddish brown under here. So I'm kind of torn between these two, or even orange, but we'll see what happens if I say red. And then I'm going to say black because there's that little black cap. You don't have to pick 3 colors. We could just go with gray and see what happens. And then I'm going to hit next. And then it asks you, what was the bird doing? So eating at a feeder, swimming or wading, on the ground, in trees or bushes, on a fence or wire, soaring or flying. This one is on a branch, so we'll say in trees or bushes. I'm going to hit identify. It's going to come up with a list of possible birds that I might have seen. My recommendation is look for 3 points of comparison that line up between your bird and what the suggestions are. So saying red might have been a little bit of a mistake, but oh, here's our bird. It looks like I chose the same picture as Merlin chose. So here you can see we've got the gray body, the sort of orangey undertail, and the black cap. So you can see here there's a list of what, 10 or 12 birds that it could be. And that's a lot easier than looking at a whole field guide of hundreds of pages of birds. So if I wanted to check out this bird and learn a little bit more, I could go see the pictures up close. I could hit, oops, we lost our catbird. Where'd he go? I could hit info here. This is going to take me to the listing about the bird. I can then listen to sounds. Let's see if we can hear this. They're mimics, and they have these little chattery songs, but every once in a while you hear this like perfect replica of another bird, and it can be very startling. You can look at range maps and see where they're seen across North America. And if I were on my phone, I would be able to scroll through these pictures with my finger and see different images. if males and females look different, there would be examples of both of those. Sometimes there's a juvenile there. So that is the first function. Usually you would hit this is my bird, but since this is not an actual observation, I'm not going to do that. But if you did that, it would just take you back to the screen and you could start another ID. Oh, actually, this would give you the opportunity to submit. Oh, let's do it, because I did see this bird earlier today when I was prepping for this webinar. So we'll hit this is my bird, and then it's going to give you the option to go to eBird and submit your sighting, because eBird's the submission side, or you can save it with Merlin if you just want to remember that you've seen this bird before. But it'll take you right to eBird and you can start a checklist if you have eBird signed in on your phone. All right, let's go hit this home button and go back to the home screen. Actually, you know what? Let's do something else. So I want to show you a cool way to access part of Merlin, and I'd like you to do this if you can, because I'm going to give you an ID challenge. So you want to go to allaboutbirds.org, and I'm going to ask Steph to share that link there. This is this website here that you're looking at. And then right here, it says Bird ID. So go ahead and click on that, and you'll see that you can start the Bird ID function that I just shared with you. So if you can open that and then minimize it to the side of your screen, I'm going to give us a little Bird ID challenge. I'm going to play a video for you, and then your goal is going to be to identify one or two of the birds that you see. So allaboutbirds.org, click on Bird ID and move that part of your screen off to the side. And I'm gonna show our challenge video. Let's see. All right. You might have to exit full screen if it took over your screen. All right, here we go. I'm gonna hit play and see if you can identify a bird with Merlin. Some important places to pay attention to for Bird ID are color patterns on the wings and on the heads. I'm going to give you about another 30 seconds. And feel free to share any birds you've ID'd in the chat window. Okay. So how did we do? Oh gosh, no, go back. Were you able to identify any birds with Merlin? Some goldfinches. Downy woodpecker. So I saw some hairy woodpeckers too. Those two are hard. Downy is smaller and the beak is smaller. So the beak size relative to the head is important for that one. So there was a downy. Yes, there were black-capped chickadees, tufted titmice, American goldfinch. There was a nuthatch, a white-breasted nuthatch as well. There were blue jays calling in the background. I had someone. Yeah, Mike, one of the things I should have said is it would have been, you can type in a location in the app. So I should have told you to put in Ithaca for your location. Most of these birds are kind of anywhere on the eastern part of the US, but yeah, that was an important bit of information I left out, so I apologize. All right, thanks for playing along. Now, actually, we're going to go back to me sharing my screen because I want to share with you one of my favorite ways to use Merlin. So there are these other options here, and this Explore Birds function is a really useful one. So if you open it, it's essentially like a field guide, and you can scroll through and see all the birds that you have downloaded. This can be really intimidating because I have 1,700 or 1,700. Wow, that would be more birds than there are. I have 717 birds in my bird pack for Merlin. But you can also click on these little sidebars here and it'll jump to that group of bird that's pictured. But probably the most powerful way to use this Explore Birds function is by finding the likely birds in your area. And you do that by selecting this right-hand menu. And where it says filter by, you're going to change it from bird packs to likely birds. And I'm going to change it to current location, and I'm going to change it to today's date, and I'm going to sort by most likely. And when I do that and click aside, it's going to bring up a list of birds that I would see if I were to walk out and do a bird count today. And I did a bird count earlier today, and I saw the American robin, the red-winged blackbird, the catbird, the goldfinch, the song sparrow, the cardinal, and the blue jay. And I had a chickadee, but no crows. So like you can see that this is a pretty accurate list of what you're going to see if you go out there. And I had common crackle and red-eyed vireo and Baltimore oriole too. So this is a great way to plan for what you're teaching ahead too. So for example, I could change the date if I know I'm going to do a bird program. Oops, we'll do current location. If I know I'm going to do a bird program in, let's say, February. Then it's going to bring up a different list of birds. Similar birds to what we had last time, but there's some other ones in the top that weren't before, like Canada goose. Our migratory birds like the oriole and the catbird are gone. So you can plan for the likely birds when you're going to be doing your unit, which is super useful. And it's also a great way to get kids to know what birds they should get to know before they go out birding. And one of the ways that we like to do that is with a fun activity that you can see right here, this bird bingo. And we have a blog about it where you can make your own bird bingo sheet using these most likely birds that come up. So it's a great way to know what you might see what's out there. All right, let's go back to our home screen here because everybody loves Sound ID, so we better talk about it real quick. So Merlin has a Sound ID function, and what's going to happen when I hit this record button is it's going to pop up. I wonder what happens if I hit my sound recordings just to show you what it looks like. Okay, so this is what a sound recording will look like. It'll have spectrograms of what you're hearing up here, and then it will bring up the birds that it hears here. When it hears that bird singing, it will light up in kind of a yellow color. And so if there's multiple birds singing, it will help you figure out which one is singing when. And another thing to look out for is right under where the spectrogram is, a little blue dot will appear that will tell you if it's hearing a bird or not. So if you're hearing a bird and you're not seeing that blue dot, Merlin's not picking it up. But if you're hearing it and you're seeing the blue dot, Merlin's probably picking up and working on an ID. So just some things to keep an eye out for when we do our recording. All right, so sound ID. I'm going to play this track here, and we're going to see if we can get IDs. So we could see Merlin was picking up that blue jay. You could see it light up and that blue dot appear. You might have heard other birds calling in the background, and Merlin wasn't able to identify those because that recording was actually from the winter, and those birds were evening grosbeaks. They aren't here this time of year, so Merlin didn't even bring them up as a suggestion because it just doesn't make sense. And that'll happen sometimes, or sometimes you'll get kind of a weird suggestion for a bird that's not really around. So my suggestion then is just to always listen to the bird that gets brought up. You can click on it and you'll see the calls, and play the call and see if you agree with Merlin before you make a definitive ID. All right, so that's Merlin in a nutshell. We are running out of time because I get excited about Merlin. So let's dive into iNaturalist. And actually what we're going to do for that is we're going to go right to the website. So iNaturalist is a place where you can share your sightings of any living thing with a community of different observers and help people identify their own sightings as well. So if you have an account on iNaturalist, this is what you'll see when you log in. And so this is my profile here, and you can see my observations. So let's look at that just to get an idea of what, oh my, this is fun. They changed it to the map system. That's really cool. But let's go to the grid. So you can see my submissions. Some of them are recent, some of them are pretty old. I'm not good at plant ID, so I need help. I'm better at birds and insects. So I love iNaturalist because it really helps me out with things that I'm not great at. And you can see a bunch of different observations here. Let's just go ahead and click on one. Let's do something that's somewhat visible here. We'll just do these lupines. And so you can see where it was observed. And you can see that it was observed to genus. So if they want this to be identified to species, which is usually the goal. Right now, I'd be relying on some help from the community. I believe this to be a large-leafed lupine, so I could add that ID, but then other people from the community can help you identify it. You'll see right here, it's flagged as needs ID. So let's go back and look at what an ID, group ID looks like. Okay, let's check out let's look at the spotted salamander here. So this is one that I knew what species it was, so I'd been able to identify it right away. So then we had a community ID suggested by 2 other folks who agreed with it. So then this becomes a cumulative ID, which makes it research grade, which you can see up here. This means that the community has come to a consensus on what the species is, and it's now available to scientists to use. So most of my observations that have been out there for a while have reached that research grade level. Not all of them have, though. Another cool thing about iNaturalist is you can go to this Explorer area here, And you can see all of the observations made. So 142 million observations of 430,000 species, which is fantastic, and more than 2.6 million observers. You can see most recent sightings here. You can also, if you wanted to, narrow it down to location. So I'm going to do Tompkins County, New York, because that's the county I live in. And then you can see what's been seen around you. That is the coolest insect ever. So it's like a really cool resource for learning what's out there around you, helping other people identify it. So for example, I could say, oh, that is absolutely a jack in the pulpit. And I could agree with his ID. Is this evidence private enough to... Yes, we'll say that one. So then I'll tell it, yes, I think this is evidence is enough. It's definitely a jack in the pulpit. Oh, actually, I want to go back and withdraw that because I want to agree with this one. It is the species. So you can see that there's a couple different ways you can do it. Cool. All right. That is iNaturalist in a nutshell. Now it's time to check out Seek. So Seek is, actually, we'll go straight to the app. Seek is essentially to iNaturalist what Merlin is to eBird. It's kind of the ID arm. You can take pictures in the iNaturalist app and it will make some suggestions about what you see. But Seek is a little bit more interactive and it uses computer visioning. So this is the Seek app. You can see it knows where I am. Here are some sightings that have been in my seen in my area recently. And the ones that are checked off are ones that I've seen or at least reported to iNaturalist through Seek. And then you'll see here that I'm logged into iNaturalist, which means I can post observations I make with Seek directly through this app. I'm going to go ahead and hit this camera button, and we're going to see some of the visioning power of iNaturalist. So you'll see I have a leaf here on the table, and it's as I move the camera around, we got to dicots, which is a class. Now we're at genus, which is grapevines. And as I move the camera around, that ID changes. We have kind of a 2-for-1. I had some other plants, but they wilted too much for a good ID. Oh, it got just down to riverbank grapevine. So it got to species for a second. This is not really enough information, but for like an ID, but I could take a picture of it when it says grapevine like that. And then it's going to start to record that as an observation. And I could post to iNaturalist if I wanted to, because my phone already has all the information I need to post to iNaturalist. I'm not going to do that because obviously I'm inside and this isn't a genuine sighting. I did gather this plant from like 150 feet away, but that doesn't really count. Now you can also see that it sometimes works on other things. So here we've got a common European amber snail that I borrowed from outside. He will make a swift return to the plant he came from. And you can see I just got a bronze mollusk badge. So one of the things that's fun about Seek is it badges your achievements for you, which is kind of exciting for kids, especially every time you see something new or reach a certain number of observations, you get these little badges, which makes it super fun. So that is Seek. My recommendations for using the Seek app are keep the camera moving, try a bunch of different angles. It works better on plants that have distinctive leaves or are flowering. Flowering is really helpful for Seek as well. You can do any taxa on there. You could do, herps or birds if you can get a picture, which is really hard, but sometimes you can. You can take a picture that you've already taken and put it in there. So for example, if I wanted to go to my photos and try to identify something, I took this picture downstairs in one of our exhibits of a stuffed bird. Let's just see if Seek can do it. Yes, it is a member of birds. To be fair to Seek, when I was using the camera live down in the visitor center today, it did identify that to hooded warbler right away, which was pretty wild. So Seek is definitely worth checking out. Super fun app to play with. I know we are at time, so if you need to go, please feel free to head out. This recording will be available. I just want to share a couple other resources with you really quickly. So if you're into outdoor exploration, we do have a lot of great resources for you. There's the blogs that I mentioned, which hopefully Steph was able to share the links with you. Those links will be included in the follow-up email as well. And there's also some great hands-on activities. So our science and nature activities for cooped up kids is designed with families and educators in mind, and it has different grade ranges. There's a K2 version, 3, 5, and 6-8. And older kids can go through these independently. They're Google slideshows with fun activities built in. And there's an adult-facing doc so you can know what you're getting into before you share it with your youth. Here's an example of some of the slides. You can see we try and make them fun and interactive. There's art opportunities, there's games that are incorporated, there's outdoor activities. And if you need some more, here's some themes here that you'll see in those activities. But if you need some more ideas, I would recommend checking out our quests. Our nature quests are these bite-sized little challenges. They complement the cooped up kids activities, but they don't have to be done as part of it. There's just these little idea generators and idea starters for ways that you can explore nature both indoors and outdoors with your families or with youth that you're working with. So those are our resources. If you would like a completion letter for today's webinar, you can email us at k12lab@cornell.edu. and we'll email that out to you. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you have an amazing summer. See a question about, is there anything about cranes? There's no specific activity or theme of cranes in the cooped up kids. I think whooping cranes might be mentioned in the conservation one, but it's not like cranes aren't the only focus. Terry, you're going back to Peru. That's awesome. I hope you enjoy. Elena, hi. Oh my gosh, what a treat. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. We will be sending out the follow-up email with the links that we talked about today and the link to the recorded webinar. I hope you get out there, see some good stuff, and share your sightings with citizen science. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself, but we'll hang out if you have any more questions. Yeah, and hope to see you next September for our next series of webinars.